Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of December of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from four cities: Bakhmut, Novomykhailivka, Первомайская and Krynki. First, let's start with Krynki. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on this direction, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles and 3 artillery systems. And today we got a lot of very interesting geolocations. Let's take a look at them. Let's take a look at the configuration of them. And as you can see, most of very interesting geolocations inside of Krynki, some of them on the northeastern part of the same village. First, let's take a look at this one, FPV drone strike. The Ukrainians today published the video of FPV drone strikes, and according to the author, Ukrainian author, the strikes were against the Russian soldiers and infantry. I'm not saying about different mappers and their maps, but according to military summary map, as you can see, this territory at least used to be under Ukrainian control. So that means that as a result of offensive operation during the previous days, we saw a lot of videos of Russian tank attacks and armored vehicles attacks where they lost some soldiers and so on. The Russians managed to, as I understand, establish control over this territory. And there are few options in this area. Obviously, the first option is that the Russian, as a result of another attack, managed to establish control just over this territory. So this is the first option. And the second option is that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to establish control over bigger territory like this. If you ask my opinion, we haven't received any geolocation from this gray zone or something like this. So I assume that the Russians just attack from the forest to the north, let's say in direction of the Казачья-Лагерка Конка, and they managed to split the Ukrainian defense belt in two parts. So, and based on this configuration, now I understand that Ukrainian forces who are currently located in this area were encircled and basically appeared in a cauldron. So this is like the Russian attempts to split the territory into many parts and to eat every single piece of cake separately. This is the situation from the Russian side. The Ukrainians also published some interesting videos, and the Ukrainian geolocations and Ukrainian FPV drone strikes took place, as you can see, on the northeastern part. For example, on this video we can see how another Russian tank was trying to attack the Ukrainian position. The Russian tank started its movement from the village by the name of Kherson. He was moving in direction of Krynki, but at some point the Russian tank was attacked by the Ukrainian FPV drones, and the tank was attacked twice. After the second strike, the Russian tank driver took a decision to withdraw, to move from the line, from the main street somewhere in direction of the forest, and basically to stay there. On this video we see that the Russian tank was damaged heavily. So basically, according to that video, the Russian tank started movement somewhere from Kherson. He was moving along this line. This is the area of the first FPV drone strike. This is the area of the second FPV drone strike. And when the Russian tank got this area, he took a decision to move to the forest and basically to hide from the Ukrainian FPV drone strikes. So that was the first video. The second video took place also in the Russian controlled territory of Krynki. On this video we see 3 men was moving along the street. Maybe these are let's say like civilians, and the Ukrainians start bombing and attacking this territory with FPV drones. So what is the interesting part from this video, why I'm paying attention to these 2 events, just regular things? I'm paying your attention and try to know that the Ukrainians have certain focus on this area, and there might be few things why the Ukrainians are focused in this area. And first, and probably the most obvious, is that the Krynki itself, the area that is currently under Ukrainian control, or what is left, was completely reduced to ruins. And this is another video of cluster rounds attack from the Russian side. There are just basements and ruins. Furthermore, recently the Russians started using FAB missile, FAB rockets, FAB air bombs, and not FAB 500 but FAB 1500. For example, on this video we can see the result of the usage of this aviation bomb: significant explosion. The radius of effect of this bomb is more than 500 meters, and we understand that there is no basement in this area that can't be destroyed as a result of that attack. So I'm trying to say that the Ukrainians, they still control this part of Krynki, but it's getting too difficult, and every single day the situation is worse and worse, and the reason of that is complete absence of fortifications, of strongholds, of areas where the Ukrainians can hide from Russian strikes. The Russians, as you can see, are using not just tank attacks like cluster rounds. The Russians also attacked the Ukrainians with FPV drones against the Ukrainian boats somewhere in Kazachelagerskaya Konko River or along Dnipro River, which also caused significant damage and significant losses to the Ukrainians. So my point is that for the previous 2-3 months of clashes for Krynki, the Russians were doing one thing. They didn't force the Ukrainians to step back. The Russians were targeting and adjusting their artillery systems, aviation systems, and FPV drone systems. That's it. Every single square meter in Krynki has its personal artilleryman or FPV drone striker or Su-34, whose main purpose to attack just this certain square meter. That's it. And this situation, now the Ukrainians can't make even a step. They send their boats to the south. This area is under FPV drone strikes. They're moving their forces to Tyaginka. The Russians use FAB-500 for these purposes. The Ukrainians try to capture another basement. The Russians send tanks. So the situation is under complete Russian control. The Russians have complete initiative in this area. So now the Ukrainians have few options. First one is to step back from this bank of the river and to get another media loss, another media failure, and another points of victory to Zaluzhny, because this is complete Zelensky political operation to hold the foothold on the Russian bank of the river. Or the second option is to attack the Russian forces on the south of the forest with the purpose to, let's say, to stretch and increase the foothold in this area. But we understand that highly unlikely the Ukrainians are able to capture this territory, because first of all they need to collect critical mass for these purposes, and there is no places where the Ukrainians can collect and hide the critical mass, because everything was have been already reduced to ruins. And the third option for the Ukrainians is to open the second area and to capture the second foothold on this territory. And based on the Ukrainian focus, we can make a projection or a small speculation that maybe the Ukrainians have plans to redeploy their forces from, let's say, one foothold in Krynki to another, and to make the same story in this area. As you can see on this area, there is the same configuration. There is a forest, there is a rivers that the Ukrainians can use for sending infantry, because the Ukrainians can't land their infantry very far from the mainland, from the foothold. For example, Ukrainians can't land their infantry somewhere here, let's say on this bank of the river on the shore, and then to use on feet to move their infantry to the south. It's like suicide operation, and the Ukrainians are not able to do this. They need such a part of a city, of a village like Kherson, Krynki, Kazachye Lageri, where the Ukrainians can get the positions on boats. And when talking about this part, let's say, of Krynki, the Ukrainians can use boats to get their forces as close as possible to the city itself, or the part of the village itself. So this is the speculation, this is the options I provided, because once again, or the Ukrainians need to step back, or to develop, or to redeploy their foothold somewhere else. And maybe this is exactly the plans that the Ukrainians are trying to implement. Furthermore, we got another video published by the Ukrainian forces. On this video, we see how the Russians were sending TOS flamethrower systems as close as possible to Krynki, probably to deal another damage to the Ukrainian foothold. But the Ukrainians discovered the movement of TOS flamethrower system and destroyed, and as you can see, there was after a very heavy explosion. And this is the situation update about Kherson direction. Now we are moving to the South Donetsk direction, where we will bypass Zaporozhye due to absence of any updates since the previous video. And now we are moving to Novomykhailivka. Just before I start making this video, we got significant update from this territory. First, let's talk about the Ministry of Defense report. According to the Russians, as a result of clashes on the South Donetsk direction, the Ukrainians lost 90 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system. When talking about the Russian report, they're saying that they managed to repel up to 4 attacks of Ukrainian 79th Airborne Assault Brigade. And as a result of those attacks, of those repelled attacks, the Ukrainians lost up to 90 soldiers. So basically, the main brigade of this area, 79th Air Assault Brigade, who's responsible for defending Novomykhailivka, just during one day lost up to quarter of battalion. 90 soldiers were killed during those clashes. And later during the day we got another video. For example, the Russians reported that on this video, the author of this video claims that on this video we can see how the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian mortar position, and as a result of artillery strike or another mortar strike, that artillery position was destroyed. And before I start making the video, the Ukrainian sources published the video of clashes on the southern part of Novomykhailivka, basically inside of the village. On this video we can see the graveyard. This is the graveyard. This is it that is already under Russian control, and this is industrial area. We see heavy bombardments. We see heavy trenches that was captured by the Russians. We see how the Ukrainian FPV drones were bombing the Russians. We see convoys of Russian tanks heading inside of the industrial area. So this video was published by the Ukrainian sources. So obviously it's like a part of propaganda where the Ukrainians show a small scenes how they were bombing and attacking the Russian forces. But basically, based on that geolocation, we can make a conclusion that as a result of a very powerful armored attack, the Russians entered this industrial area, and currently the most fierce clashes are taking place in this territory. And as I understand, the Russians are not going to step back or give up without taking under control this part of Novomykhailivka. So what we have and what are the Russian plans? Obviously, if the Russians are able to do this, the next thing they will try to do is to continue offensive operation further in the direction of the central part. Just few streets to capture, and this will split Novomykhailivka at least in 2 parts. And the Ukrainian forces who are currently located on the eastern part or will be encircled, or they will have a solution or decision to step back or to the north or further to the western part of Novomykhailivka. So that was the breakthrough. The Russians managed to collapse the Ukrainian defense belt on the south, and now was 100% serious information. We can start counting days when the Novomykhailivka is going to fall completely. Probably just a magic or luck or I don't know whatever can save Novomykhailivka from collapse and the Ukrainian garrison there. As we can see, the Russians managed to complete or to begin the battle for Novomykhailivka without any support from the northern direction, because as you can see, the Russians still are too far from the main defense belt of the Ukrainian forces. Maybe they have already captured, who knows, we just haven't received any geolocations. But we see that the Russians managed to complete the battle for Novomykhailivka or to start without the northern attack. Or maybe today the Ukrainians will move some reserves to the south, trying to stabilize the situation of Mikhailivka, and the Russians on the north will use this opportunity and they will continue offensive, or at least the Russians will start their movements from the north just with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy their reserves from the Zverina's fortification, from Pobeda and so on. And don't forget that during the previous days the Russians managed to concentrate and capture the eastern positions in Novomykhailivka, and we also can expect at least another point of pressure from this direction with the same purpose, not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy their forces, not to allow them to be flexible. And something tells me that this is going to be the first cauldron of 2023, because Bakhmut wasn't a cauldron, but maybe Novomykhailivka is going to be a first cauldron in this special, even maybe, let's say, Mariupol was the first one, Novomykhailivka maybe will be the second real cauldron. Not a very big one, but just for some few hundreds of soldiers, but you know. Now we are moving to Avdiivka direction. According to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, as a result of clashes on Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost 220 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, 190 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, including 1 Bradley and 6 artillery systems. As we discussed, the main Russian attack, the main Russian progress take place along Pervomaiska, and the Russians are trying to get as close as possible in direction of the main supply road, one of the 3 roads that Ukrainians use to support their forces and garrison in Avdiivka. And we're talking about the line Umanska-Nitailova. The Russians are getting closer. The Russians have natural barriers from the south in face of these water reservoirs, and the same story to the north. Another river or something like that goes on the north of Russian positions in Pervomaiska that also protects the Russians from Ukrainian counterattacks while they're moving to the western direction. So when talking about this territory, also everything goes and develops in Russian favor, and the Russians probably also will collapse Pervomaiska much earlier in comparison with Avdiivka or the northern part of Avdiivka. When talking about northern part, about chemical plant, of course the situation develops obviously in Ukrainian favor. We can talk a lot about Russian counterattacks, about the Stepova, Berdych, about the railways, but the facts are saying that Ukrainians control this situation. Maybe that was the Russian original plan, to force the Ukrainians to collect and concentrate as much as possible forces, as many as possible brigades in this area, and not to allow the Russians to encircle Avdiivka. Meanwhile, the Russians have almost collapsed Krynki, Novomykhailivka, Bakhmut, Ivanivske, Sinkovka. So the Ukrainians will save one city, Avdiivka, but they will lose the entire combat line, starting from Kherson and ending somewhere in the Kupiansk direction. And now we are moving to Bakhmut area, where we got also lots of very interesting details and updates. The Russians continue their offensive operation in direction of Klishchiivka. After a few attempts from the Ukrainian side to counterattack the Russians on the hill, the Ukrainians realized that there are no chances to do this, and basically the Ukrainians withdraw their positions on the northern part of Klishchiivka towards the central one and the southern part. So according to some Russian sources and reports from the ground, the Russians managed to restore complete control over this part of Klishchiivka. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocation, but as I understand, soon we're gonna get this. Furthermore, the Russians during the day made few attempts to attack in direction of Andreevka and the railways, but all of those attacks were repelled by the Ukrainians with FPV drone strikes and artillery strike. We will not watch the videos, but maybe we can, how the Ukrainians were bombing the Russian infantry who were moving and heading to the railways. And that's how that those attacks were repelled. So a lot of artillery strikes with the cluster rounds. So this area is under Ukrainian control. So the situation is stable. Now we are moving to Ivanivske, and this is another problematic territory for the Ukrainians. The Russians are pushing, as we discussed once again, the Russians have concentrated, according to the Ukrainian forces, up to 80,000 soldiers in Bakhmut, and these 80,000 soldiers are ready to capture a lot of cities and villages, not just Ivanivske. But now, as I understand, the Ukrainians took a decision to step back and to leave every single fortification in the fields. The Russians continue advancing. Today we got more reports and other updates that they managed to capture a few strongholds and trenches in the vicinity of Khromovo-Bogdanovka on the line. The Russians continue offensive operation in direction of Dachi, this Chernobyl's residential area. Today we got another geolocated video how Kamerton, ex-Wagner forces with special unit Akhmat was storming the area. So for now we don't know the real results, but obviously the main Russian goal is to establish control over the entire residential area and to capture something like this. And from this perspective, now we see the global plan and the global scope of the Ukrainians. And today there was one interesting article published by the Russian analytics on the ground, maybe from someone from Concord, from the special unit Akhmat or Kamerton. They were saying that Ukrainians took a decision to leave positions in the fields in Klishchiivka and Andreevka, and now the Ukrainians are doing one thing. They are trying to concentrate their forces in Ivanivske, on this area. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians reported they managed to capture up to 70 Ukrainian soldiers. So they're leaving their positions in the fields And as I understand, the main battle of Bakhmut direction this winter is going to take place for Ivanivske. And based on the geolocations, we also can say and make a conclusion that the Russians are moving on the line Khromova, so the northern flank of Ivanivske, and the Russians are moving Bakhmut, Chernobyl, its southern area from the south, and the third direction is Bakhmut, Klishevka 215.7 hill and to the south. So the main battle, as I understand, of this front line is going to take place in Ivanovska. And the Ukrainians are trying to move back every single brigade they have. They will concentrate and they will try to hold this territory as long as possible, because if Ivanovska falls, the entire front line may collapse and the Russians will get a gate and open space to attack Chasov Yar from the south after Ivanovska, and the same story, Chasov Yar from Grigorievka, Bogdanovka from the north. So this is the Russian plans. First Ivanovska, then with two directions from Bogdanovka, Ivanovska further to Chasov Yar. And for these purposes, the Russians have concentrated 80,000 army on this direction. Today we got probably some geolocations from Novomykhailivka. The Russian air drone was flying above this territory, making some reconnaissance operation, trying to discover possible Ukrainian weak positions, machine gun positions, and so on, but nothing special. I don't expect any movements in direction of this village. When talking about Siversk Solidar direction, we haven't received even a single geolocation. Maybe we're gonna receive some later, but for now, nothing. Liman, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, the Ukrainians lost on this direction 220 soldiers, 9 armored vehicles, including 1 tank, and 1 artillery system. There was just 1 geolocation from the Ukrainian side, how they attacked the Russian lonely stand soldier in the village. Kupin's direction, the same story. The only interesting update is that Ukrainians managed to restore the bridge above Oskol River, and they managed to restore the supply and support of their forces in Sinkovka, Kupinsk, Kislovka, Kotlarovka. So within the next few days we need to expect another Russian missile strike against this road, against this bridge. And when talking about Sinkovka, the clash is continuous. The Ukrainians try to counterattack. Now they're using just FPV drones. They're bombing the Russian positions on the northern part of the village. Currently it's very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians are successful or not, but the only thing I know for sure that the Russians managed to dig in deeper in this area, and also within the next few days the Russians probably will renew their attempts to attack the Ukrainian forces in Sinkovka, and they will try to collapse this defense belt as well. According to the Ministry of Defense, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers, 6 armored vehicles including 1 Leopard and 1 artillery system Gvozdika. The clashes on this direction are very heavy. And at the end of the video, another video of Udai diary. The 31st day, the day began 32nd. The day began the level of losses of 209, and the day ended with the level of loss from the Ukrainian side on 214. So additional 5 soldiers were killed or wounded as a result of work of 1 FPV drone operator. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.